Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Today we have a conversation with a friend, Ed Rosa.
That's me. Hi. My filmmaking partner and I have a YouTube channel, Toothless Richard Productions, where you can see a number of our short films.
There was no budget for destruction.
Raul Hilberg tells us this partway through Shoah Part 2, trying to describe the bureaucracy of the Nazi machinery, which turns people into merchandise into things that are easily manipulable and causes the whole system to grind on, but without naming the parts that are being ground. That is, the Jewish people, the autistic people, the old people, the senile, the crazed, the Roma, etc. That remark sticks to me so strongly because in one step it defines exactly the way that the German state acted on people and turned them into objects that were easily disposable. Consequently, I was thinking of other ways I have bumped into this idea, and perhaps you're familiar with the series Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
I watched that with my newborn first child in my lap because I'm a cool dad.
Yeah, jumping in young.
Right. And, I think it's a 10-episode arc. And in episode 9, Why We Fight is the title of the episode. There is a sequence when our band of brothers have marched their way towards Berlin and they encounter the Lanzmann concentration camp.
Will you ask him what kind of camp this is? Why are they here?
Was ist das hier?
Das hier? Das ist ein Arbeitslager für Unerwünschte, wirklich.
He says it's a work camp for unerwünschte. I'm not sure what the word means, sir. Unwanted, disliked, maybe.
Criminals?
I don't think criminals, sir. Verbrecher.
Verbrecher? Nein.
No.
Ärzte, Musiker, Beamte, Bauern,
Doctors, musicians,
Schreiber, Schneider,
tailors,
Intellektuelle.
clerks, farmers, intellectuals, I mean normal people.
Juden.
Our Americans start giving them rations and water, and then they're told by the surgeon or the doctor attached to their unit, listen, you can't do that. These people are in active starvation, they're malnourished, you're going to cause their systems to break, snap, and kill them by overfeeding them too fast. It needs to be controlled. Whereupon the GIs who spend all this time with ensnare the people they've just liberated and shove them back into the camp, which makes several of the members of this group sick. And you can see, because of the language differences of these Americans we're watching, that they can't communicate fast enough and well enough to these inmates what niceness this is meant to be. We're going to help you, truly. And that episode of Band of Brothers, Why We Fight, was instrumental in setting up an idea. What would I do if I were an in-theater soldier having repeated experiences with action, and then I roll into a place that looks relatively orderly from the outside, a fenced-in encampment? I would think to myself, these are bad people. They're in prison. But these bad people haven't been fed. Shouldn't I just leave them alone because they're bad people? I would associate it that way.
Right.
And why would they deserve my assistance? On top of that, though, once their coat is pulled to the fact that these people are non-combatants and are innocent of any crime, they're being ethnically cleansed, I think my point of view would shift, but what am I to do? That, with this notion of there is no budget for destruction, were lingering a lot in my thoughts as I pushed away from finally completing the nearly 5-hour second half of Shoah to come talk with you today. And I wonder then, are there any basic thoughts that you had to kick off your experience with this second half before we really get into it?
It's like trying to clean a messy room or something that's really a mess. You know it's got to be fixed, but there's so much you just don't know where or how to start. And even if you start chipping away at it, it's going to be a long time before you even notice the results of your work. So yeah, I've got to imagine coming into the camp as the Allies. It must have just seemed so overwhelming.
How far is my canteen of water even going to go?
Right. Well,
because I've got orders to keep walking away.
Right, and it's funny because in part 2, one of the guys that we hear from towards the end is a German or a Polish guy who worked in sort of ghetto management, in sort of the bureaucratic side of things, where he and his superior, they were trying to manage the ghetto and make things better. And Lanzmann, he's like, well, to what end? Better how? This
is a pen, and you're going to eventually murder these people.
Right.
Not on sight. So in that respect, yeah, better than death.
Right. And then it got a little more interesting because Lanzmann almost gets, I don't want to say accusatory, but he starts kind of pushing the guy on why didn't you do something? You occupied a role with some kind of power, you should have done something.
Yeah.
Morally, that's true, right? But he pushes back a little. He's like, well, not only did I not know then what I know now, which is, incredible, right? Because we obviously, as we discussed last time too, we sort of know how the internal machinery kind of worked, and they only told you what you needed to know, and but also, what is he going to do as one guy who's kind of 28 years old, who's occupying kind of like a junior role?
As I recall, he said, I just got out of law school the year before.
Right.
This is my first chance to show my new skills, which were hard won.
Yeah.
And I'm a bureaucrat to organize a group of people who are considered enemies of the state, so
right.
I may as well make their lives as good as
I can, right?
Inside of this condition where they're considered enemies,
right?
We don't need to be nice to them.
And if I push back on this, and if I try to push back on this in any kind of really significant way, not only am I dealing with this military apparatus that has, this is the final solution. This is, in fact, I even remarked to my brother when we were watching this, it's like, at a certain point, it almost seems like Hitler didn't even give a shit about winning the war. It's almost as if he knew, we're gonna lose it, so let's just kill as many Jews as we can before we lose.
That is one of the lingering sort of big statements, I think, that comes out in the second half of this movie. I think the twist for me as a watcher from part 1 to part 2 is a switch in emphasis between observers, witnesses offering their testimony about what the Shoah was in 1942, 1943, and in part 2 we shift towards the survivors and greater testimonials from the prosecutors, the guards, and so on.
Right.
It shifts from the generality of people on the outside of that system to those who are on the inside of the experience.
Right.
Which deepens the horror of the whole thing. Like you, I watched this in pieces, and I took a break to go speak with my missus and said, I thought part 1 was awful and the worst horror movie I've ever seen. But then there's the first couple of hours of part 2, and it got even worse.
Yeah.
She didn't want any details from me because, it's dreadful stuff.
Well, and that's what you want from a sequel. You want it to one up the original.
Correct.
But just to put the point back on my long-winded diatribe. So really, there was nothing that guy could do as this one person occupying this junior role, and to me, it seems like a similar position to be in on opposite sides, like the Allied soldier entering a camp knowing that it needs to be liberated, but how do I make a difference? Not only is he fighting this military apparatus, but there's so much popular agreement, not necessarily with the way that the Holocaust was being carried out, but obviously there was a significant enough anti-Jew sentiment present to allow Hitler to rise to power and stuff like that. So I just think it's kind of interesting how people on either side of the conflict can find themselves in the same position.
Well, I took it and read it in a different way even, because we spend so much significant time in the second half re-meeting people that we met in the first half. I'm thinking in particular of Abraham Bumba, the barber of Auschwitz. Right?
Yeah.
We spend this extensive, painful sequence of him cutting the hair of a friend I read, somebody who already trusted him. And the camera just lingers on him for just minutes in a single take as he describes what his job was to be a barber, shearing the hair mostly from women as they were preparing to go in the gas chambers. So you were just remarking on how this administrator on the German side of things in control of the ghetto felt that while he was a German, he was in the machine, he felt like his little slice of that pie was so minuscule that he was worth less, except for the people that he was controlling. In a similar fashion, I thought I saw a parallel between people like Bamba, who had this odd little privileged role of survivorship because of this weird skill He was a barber before the war. We learn you're a barber. The only way to keep yourself from being exterminated today is cut hair.
Mm-hmm.
Cut hair fast,
Mm-hmm.
in waves for hours, and then you'll get a chance to sleep and eat a little bit of gruel, and you're going to come back and do it tomorrow. And you know that there's going to be a day when we won't need your services, and in the oven you go.
Right.
And this hangs over him. What is the power that I've got? How do I remain a human being? And in both examples, neither man really had a very good clue except try to not let yourself go.
Right. Well, and even the dude that was the ghetto management, his boss committed suicide.
Right.
He clearly knew a little bit more and couldn't live with what was going on, so he opted out.
There was another story that was told by Philip Muller. It's in translation, so I'll summarize. But what he was describing is this very dynamic. He was a Sonderkommando, I think was his role. So he helped people be herded into the gas chambers, asked them to disrobe, cleaned up their garments, and moved the bodies once they had been killed. And he could recall a time when he, just like we, looking at the movie, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you explain what was going on? Why didn't you warn people? Why didn't you have an uprising? Why didn't you do something? He explained that he observed at one point another man working alongside him recognized one of the people being brought in for death. This co-worker of his whispers to this person, hey, listen, this is not a shower. You're going to be killed. I want you to know this. Whereupon that woman, being told this news, tried to scream it to everybody else around her,
Right.
who understood it too, but weren't willing to do anything about it but just sort of move through what was already happening.
Well, maybe they got mad at her and they called.
They
to say
held
she
her
was
back
crazy.
from the gas chamber. They did not kill her with all of her friends, villagers, loved ones. She was alone as the survivor. And then they stood her up and they beat her and tortured her until she pointed out who gave her the news. Whereupon they took that guy, this well-intentioned Samaritan, so to speak, and shoved him directly into an oven and burned him alive.
Mm-hmm.
So Philip Muller tells us this. I found myself crying.
Yeah. It's
What can you do in that system?
right.
You don't have agency, and you barely have a sense of ethics and morality anymore.
Right.
But you can cleave to some small bit of human condition, some bit.
Anything you would have tried to do to push back, you would have just met the same fate.
I'm just having this little brain bubble, but you can remember Eddie Murphy's Raw.
Brothers act like they couldn't have been slaves back 200 years ago. It ain't like them motherfuckers like that shit. I wish I was a slave. I would fuck somebody up. Shit, tell me to bale some motherfucking cotton. I would have been on the street and shit. You would have came up and said, hey, yo, nigga, bale this cotton. Oh, said, suck my dick, master. Suck my motherfucking dick. That's right, I ain't bailing the motherfucker. It wasn't like that shit. The first dude that got off the boat said that shit. Bail that cotton. Fuck you, motherfucker. The other motherfucker said, we'll bail the shit. Just keep that shit away. Just keep that fucking shit away from me.
Kiss my ass, Nazi general.
Right.
You're not going anywhere. There's no option but to try in some small way to soldier on, which makes that story told by Bamba as he's cutting the hair of his friend. He's crying. He asks no more. Please stop. It's dreadful.
Yeah.
But then it's absolutely some of the greatest cinematic testimony I've ever watched.
Yeah.
I couldn't pick up my mouth. It was so heavy. Just what's going on in front of me?
Yeah.
I was fixated on this guy.
Yeah.
You see his tattoo in his arm, right? You're watching him clip hair. It's kind of this rad 70s hairstyle. I mean, I'm responding to all of those aesthetics, but what I'm hearing, I get it. I can comprehend the words. But I'm trying to imagine what you would do if you're Bamba, and how then you've survived the 35 years since that time.
Right.
And assembled some kind of a life. He's in a community. How do you do all of that and reconcile what you lived through and how accidental that was and how open to fates that really was and how little control you had over any of it. Mm-hmm. But you can testify to it, which is the point of this whole exercise.
And all he could do was try to remain as useful as he could, because he hung on to that hope that, one day, this will stop. No, I found that sequence, that whole bit to just be absolutely magnificent filmmaking. I mean, to sort of separate it as much as they can.
Right, form and content are different things. Yeah.
We sit on like a single take for just the longest time. it's interesting because the barber shop seems to be bustling with activity.
Yeah.
Other people are getting their hair cut. People are coming in and leaving.
Right, we hear traffic sounds.
But nobody's saying a word.
Right.
And somehow everybody seems sort of like not oblivious to the presence of the camera and the director, as if it's like just kind of a natural thing. It's weird. Like when I watch movies and, you know, I'll watch like extras in a scene and I'll see them like looking right in the camera or you know what I mean?
Yeah, it spoils a little.
All these little things, right? And nobody did like any of that really.
And you have the sense too, like they were all soberly listening, just as we are. And I kept thinking, these things you're reviewing, you don't say this stuff in public.
Right.
Everybody here can hear you.
Right. But then I had to imagine like how many other people in the barbershop like either was either there too or had a loved one or a family member that was. Because the way he's cutting the hair and just doing his job, he doesn't have to like put a lot of concentration into it. He's so good at it; it's just kind of second nature, and it's just kind of this routine thing. Like everybody needs to get their hair cut.
Well, as I recall, the particular story that he is reticent to tell is of one of his co-barbers, and he thinks there were 12 or 16 of them, men just like him, lined up cutting hair, and the guy meets his wife and his children.
Yeah.
And he's got to harvest their hair, and he can't spend extra time with it.
Right.
But to the degree he can sort of try to, or be physically close to them for the very last time. I mean,
I don't know how you do it.
Right. And you see Bamba you see all of that register again, the pain and the horror of it, but then the routine quality, as you point out.
Yeah.
Stick to what you're doing. He's still clipping the whole way through.
It's almost trance-inducing in a way, a little bit. And then anytime you would have interviews or with anybody like that survived. It isn't a question of like when the emotional floodgates will open. It's not a question of if, it's when. Mm-hmm. The way Bamba was talking, it was just a very controlled, sort of deliberately paced manner where there was like, you know, plenty of pauses, which I just kind of assume is him trying to, because you don't want to relive those emotions,
right?
But
you can sort of see him walking up to a fence post. Okay, this is everyday speech. Okay, I'm stepping through it for you, Claude.
Right.
Here comes another post. I don't want to go over here. All right, okay, but this is where I have to say no, and he does.
Right. He finally hits that point in the story.
Like, please continue. You must.
Yeah, and he backs off of the dude's hair, and it's like he's trying to compose himself and all this kind of stuff, and like. It was just fascinating to me, sort of how long it took him to get to that point.
Yeah.
But because so many of the victims that he had to deal with personally didn't have like that same personal connection as when it was his friend's like wife that comes in.
Right.
And then it happens.
Right. A lot of the times when I discuss how film stories work with students who attend my classes, I make this big pitch about how the most successful movies create a character that we see ourselves in or that we wish we would behave like if we were trapped in the story world.
Right.
And when that happens and happens well, that character does not have to resemble our physical characteristics, our religiosity, our ethnic origin. They don't even have to be our species. We've certainly been able to cross-species identify with aliens and the like.
Yeah.
But that's critical. We have to have that. And if we do, we'll tolerate an awful lot. How do I know? Because Bamba's telling me things I don't want to hear.
Right.
But I'm so glad for his hosting through this terrible thing. And I presume by now, he must now be long deceased.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah.
All of these people must now be quite long gone. I mean, this is a 40-year-old document. Some of the interviews are nearly 50 years old for when Lanzmann began the project. There was another, it was just a small player. I don't know that he was even named in the text because it happened with a smattering of people describing what they lost in the camp, which again switches us from part one, which was about observers in the villages around this whole experience and introducing key figures. And the second half is about those key figures who lived through the camps on either side of the fence. Some of those survivors would talk about the family members they lost, and I just found my chin all trembly with this old guy who's like, I lost 4 sons, a wife, and my dad.
Yeah, the Italian guy where he had the photos.
And he's got them arranged sort of in front of him on a table.
Yeah.
And his face is doing odd little
nervous
ticks.
It looked to me like he, too, was trying to keep those floodgates, closed And so he's like kind of forcing this kind of smile.
And that was a story from perhaps 35 years, maybe 40 years in the past when the movie was made. So we're meeting a dude who, to my eye, looks like he's probably in his 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And he would just describe these losses, not at great detail, except for his father, who he said was 85 when swept into the camp. 85.
Yeah.
And he has a photograph of the man with the beard. You know, it's
Yeah.
the artifact of photography, much like the whole of this documentary for us in this generation, and anybody later who seeks to sort of think about human horror at some point in the future will contend with the fact we have photographic evidence. I'm given to believe in the evidence. And just the still photographs of his children who were taken from him violently and awfully decades ago. You don't outgrow that. It's immeasurable.
Yeah.
The loss of children and a wife and a father all at once.
Right. And knowing how horribly...
And he was just one
went.
among several people
Right.
who give this sort of testimony about their lives. I found the structure of this movie, as I said, so much more difficult to deal with for about 2.5 hours or so. And then it lifted out to become a different kind of an experience, which was harder for me to become committed to, with the exception of when we get another sort of one of these great talking head figures. We have the Professor Raul Hilberg, we've got Bomba, we've got other people who give us information, and it's helpful when I hear it in English because I'm an English-only speaker. We get this guy, Jan Karski, and he was an apparatchik in the Polish government in disarray away from Poland once it had been captured by the Germans, trying to figure out ways to create the resistance. Now, the way his role drops into the movie, I think, was Lanzmann's knowing and thoughtful consideration of what do the Goyim think about this thing? Because they probably have a joke at the ready, much like Eddie Murphy thinking about American slavery.
Right.
Why didn't they just grab pitchforks or business tools or rocks and just throw them at the guards? Well, the thing is, they did.
Yeah.
But if they didn't do so with some organization, they would just be put down with a machine gun or the butt of a rifle. And these are malnourished people.
Yeah.
There is no water in abundance. They're not bathing. They're ravaged by disease.
Somebody even said at some point, like, they didn't use, like, physical violence to suppress us. They starved us.
Right.
Because by starving us, like, we were physically incapable of rising up or resisting.
And the
anyway.
easiest little lie, like if you just take your clothes off, we'll take you to the showers and we'll give you a mug of tea.
Right.
The simplest little lie we will just follow.
Right.
Because we have been so deprived.
Yeah, you're so desperate and so thirsty.
There's this other little element, and I think it's a reconstruction in miniature of the Auschwitz
with
sort
the
of system.
Yeah, with like the gas chamber underneath, like a below ground.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's got all these little figures. I have to imagine that this would be a giant tabletop display at a Holocaust museum. We're now familiar with those stateside, but this is probably somewhere in Poland to sort of mark what this all was. What's fascinating about it, it's that Ken Burns kind of effect. You know, where you have a still object and your camera just moves slowly over it, and it creates a sense of motion and excitement. We have this model with hundreds of small human figures that are pretty well crafted. We see uniforms; those are the guards.
Yeah, I thought it was surprisingly detailed.
Right. We can see the sort of movement of the crowd of inmates that are being processed down into the chamber. They thin out a little bit as people begin to undress. We see naked bodies. It moves through until we're finally in the gas chamber itself, where the body turns into just limbs, struggling to get on top of one another. And all of this is done as a small miniature to give you an impression of what this whole thing is, with cutaways to see inside these rooms, the factory system.
The product in Auschwitz was death. Everything was geared to keep the crematoria running. This was the aim. This means that the prisoners would work on a road leading to the crematoria. They would build the crematoria. They would build all barracks necessary for keeping up prisoners. And of course, apart from that, there was an element of a normal German concentration camp because the Krupp and Siemens factories moved in and utilized slave labor. So that Krupp factories and Siemens factories were built partly directly within the concentration camp Auschwitz-Birkenau.
The scale of that, registered on the bodies of those who were killed, is of course the worst part of all of this. But those who were perpetrating it, gleefully or no, willingly or no, they did perpetrate this. And the one thing that's missing from this document, Shoah, which is not its purpose. What do those guards, who really were butting heads, who were billy clubbing people, who were grabbing infants and throwing them against the wall because the parents weren't scrambling fast enough, or whatever.
Yeah, we don't really hear from any of those. We hear from a couple of people, like the old dude who sings the Treblinka song at the beginning of part 2. Who sort of worked there, right? But they had to obviously film him in secret because that's where we get him from the the FBI van, the Flowers by Irene van, outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't ever really get anybody who actually did any of that stuff.
No doubt those guards matured from being 25-year-old soldiers into being pensioners with the same sense of reconciliation of past bad acts and terrible things. And the one thing I've learned about people who do terrible, awful things to other people is there's lots of ways they can rationalize the reasons what they had to do that, and also to project onto their victims the stuff that they feel about themselves and not taking responsibility for, I made them that way. So that's a glimpse of something that I wanted more from this. Well, I want more from world documentation, let's put it that way.
Right.
It's not Lanzmann's failure. He made choices.
Yeah.
I'm just aware that that's something that I also wanted to see because those people populated the world, and I'm sure now, these years later, we're probably down to the last several hundred of such men who are still with us, who are deeply old. So that sense of balance goes missing from this. And I think when we first saw part 1, one of the things that I mentioned that I didn't expect, it's such a very narrowly focused thing. It doesn't broaden its view past mostly looking at Poland and how Poland became the site of these concentration camps as an annexed territory, and parts of Europe were liquidating Jewish peoples and others and so on. It doesn't get wrapped up in trying to give you a bigger scale view of it all, and it doesn't get wrapped up in dates and times, and it doesn't get wrapped up in the whole war. It doesn't do any of that.
Right.
Part 2 definitely doesn't do that. It's very restricted. And as you get into, hour 7, hour 8, you're like, well, gosh, we're really not going to learn about Anne Frank. It's really not going to be here.
Right,
This is an entirely different kind of a thing. So back to that guy, Jan Karski, the testimony that he gives. First of all, it kicks off where that guy is dressed to the nines.
Oh, he had that tie.
Oh, yeah.
That suit is it's sharp.
He's in an apartment to be interviewed by Lanzmann's crew. He sits, and he's definitely a silver fox, an aged guy. I think he was an academic.
He was a professor.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he's got all of those skills, multi-language, and he's speaking to us in English. And as he sits down, you can see he's really intensely emotionally uncomfortable, so much so that he begins crying, gets up, and leaves.
At the beginning.
And they had a different camera watching him walk away from down the hall. Or maybe it was just mixed a certain way. They would sort of see him gather himself away from the interview session, and he comes back to then give us insights.
And he even acknowledges, he even says, like, I know this is important, like, for historical documentation, so I'm going to try to do this.
And refers directly to Lanzmann, your project.
Right.
It's a remarkable thing, and it comes very late in the documentary. And it's another one of these tour de force lengthy sequences of testimony, like Bomba's piece. Karski's is valuable in as much as we, the viewers watching this thing, think, why didn't they rise up? I made that point earlier. And he explains some of the reasons why that was difficult to do. Not only the starvation, not only the terrible conditions of it all, but the woeful ignorance of the world outside of the ghettos and the camps. And so he describes his journey in the middle 40s while he was this go-between delivering news, a courier. I think that was his official role between the off-site Polish government and other world leaders. And he made a contact with a resistance, an underground personality who was stuck in the Warsaw ghetto. And so the guy says, listen, why don't you come see what the ghetto is? Because having first-hand opinions and observations to then share with the world is the best way to get down to the bottom of this. If you can find the ear that is sympathetic, if you can say what I saw with my own eyes, that will be stronger than you reporting what I tell you. So please come visit us. So they arrange all of this. So he sneaks into a prison-like place, the ghetto of Warsaw.
Right.
And he does this perhaps a year before the uprising that eventually did happen and resulted in the complete extermination and destruction of that part of Warsaw.
Right.
I didn't know that the ghetto was literally in the center of the city.
Oh, okay.
So it's just a tenement structure of apartments in a ring with the rest of the city and all of its commerce and all of its business and all of its qualities of warmth in any big city happening all around it. And right in the center are these tens of thousands of sequestered people who are waiting to be liquidated to the camps, to be liquidated to ash.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing. And he breaks in with the help of this guy, and he describes what he sees. And one of the details that he emphasized, which I think we really do need to spend time thinking about, the fullness of our senses as people, but he emphasized the scent.
Yeah.
That there were literally dead bodies just
in the
up,
streets.
just cords, because they couldn't be put anywhere. Nobody had money to ask them to be moved away, or pay somebody to bury them, or whatever would be customary. There was nothing to do but let everybody rot. Excrement, waste, all of the stuff associated with that, the smell. And you see this very, very well-composed man. He turned entirely inward. His focal point ceased to be Lanzmann, the interlocutor. Instead, it was like staring at his nose, letting his eyes kind of roll back as he was reciting things, painful things. But he was emphasizing the other senses and the way that it is an assault on the totality of your ability to be alive. And then he emphasized things we learned elsewhere in this documentary, that one key mechanism is get everybody into these ghettos, move them out of their homes, make them pay for the movement themselves.
Yeah.
With their own dollars, their own gold, or whatever it might be. And then when they're there, they can't then feed themselves, and then here comes illness.
Right.
You can just have a quarter of them killed just by doing that over.
Right. With all the corpses rotting away in the street. Like, I mean, that's just it's a breeding ground for disease.
And it was, and it is. And then he describes that he, because he's a free citizen, if he can get out of the ghetto,
right,
he goes back out the way that he came and goes back to polite society. And I think he made a second visit to see things from another point of view and explore it all. Again, being guided, being pointed out things. Again, the smells, the sights, what he heard, what it felt like, the sense of dread that weighs down. And then he was sort of given his marching orders from these uprising revolutionaries. Tell everybody what's happening. Report on this. Create outrage. Make this a new military target. Save us.
The Jewish situation is unprecedented in history. Egyptian pharaohs did not do it. Babylonians did not do it. Now, for the first time in history, actually, they came to the conclusion, unless the Allies take some unprecedented steps, regardless of the outcome of the war, the Jews will be totally exterminated.
I think we were joking a bit offline, but we could make Shoah 2, and it would be you and I interviewing people who have survived watching Shoah.
Right. Yeah, their experiences, right, with it.
And that could be funny, it could be sobering. We could watch people of our age get teary and cry. We could do that, and that could be an interesting exercise. In fact, I think it's a worthwhile project. What's the point of saying this? Well, most people will never conceive of this, because most people have never even heard of this document. And a great many younger people today haven't really heard very much about the Holocaust of World War II. There have been so many seemingly awful tragedies and cruelties visited on the world by various despots, militaries, people in the last 80 years, but none touched this.
Right.
This is the biggest.
Right.
And that is referred to by various of the talking heads here. I think Hilberg, the professor from Columbia, makes the remark that what was new about this was that it completed the murder and the cover-up. Other people in other places have attempted something like that with their ethnic outgroups, but not on this scale. It remains the biggest thing out there.
Yeah,
I hope that it will, aside from
yeah,
nuclear-based Armageddon, which I do worry about once again. It's like I'm in the 80s all over.
Yeah.
I grew up thinking that I'm going to go up in a mushroom cloud. I
Absolutely.
didn't think about it for 25 years. Now I'm back to thinking that's what's going to happen.
Right. No, me too. I remember as a kid just being just so, I unfortunately saw Nick Myers the day after.
Right.
And just being just plagued by nightmares, thinking that, I only have like 25 minutes before the bombs get here when they, push the button. And then there was a little while where I didn't have to worry about that anymore. At least that's what I thought. And now, I got to worry about it again. Oh, great. I thought we were, past this.
And barring that kind of incident, I can't imagine one institution from one polity in one country being able to inflict this kind of harm. But the fact is, we do need to reconcile that people have forgotten. And people aren't going to review this kind of lengthy document the way you and I have. And they're not going to read history the way that I think you and I have. They're not going to watch the fiction that you and I have. my kids are under 20, and I'm imagining to them this basically is not much different than when did the brontosaurus live? And it becomes an issue of educating a population that has all of this material to become educated, and I'm not sure people are doing it.
That's one thing that always bums me out. For some reason, I have this idea that it's kind of like unique to America, because I've traveled a little, and it seems like education is valued, much, much more in other societies. In fact, here in America, it's bad to be smart.
Right.
It's bad. It's not cool. It's not hip to be smart, to be educated, to know stuff. The further we get away from this, not only does it seem like it might, Hitler might as well have been, up on the earth at the same time as the T-Rex, but the significance and the weight of this evil and this event and how important it is to not ever have this repeated, that's going to be lost. And people are going to forget, even in the face of having something like this film that they can go to and actually learn. Most people are not going to be interested.
There's an idea that's bubbling in my head, and that's the idea of allegory, which stems from that whole system of symbols that we use when we interpret things, which can be a little overwhelming when we try to deal with scale. Deep time, as you were referring to, or the statistical value of what's a million people, what's 6 million people, what's 12 million. We can't fathom that when we're individuals. So I'm coming at this from a goofy angle. But a lot of our biggest, most successful CGI-rich entertainments today are allegories of previous human excitement, let's say. I'm thinking of Avatar in particular, where Colonel Quaritch takes his gunships to go attack Awa because he wants to punch a hole through the cultural memory of the Na'vi, and says so. His goal is to drive them so far away from their foundations that they will be reduced. He doesn't have to murder them all, but he has to reduce them to being supplicants at best, so they will clear the way for what he wants. And that strikes me as the allegory of Hitler's regime.
Yeah.
Let's just punch a hole right through the cultural memory that is so big, so dominant, so powerful, and so all-powerfully acting upon them that all they will do is shake and tremble at our might. And wow, if we do that fast enough, we simply win everything.
Yeah.
And that goal, which we see in entertainment after entertainment after entertainment, is often based on the shock and the awe of spectacle. Interestingly, this was prosecuted over just about 3 years' time. I think it really kind of hones into an active thing in 42.
Yeah.
Through the end of the war years, after tuning up for a few years to get ready for that. All of those people moved through that system, and it was not done spectacularly. It was done bureaucratically and quietly.
Yeah.
And there's that point. Incrementally to improve its efficiencies and cut out waste. One of the sort of damning things that, again, I pushed away from while watching this, thinking about that notion of fictional spectacle as allegory of human harms in the past versus some of the truthy qualities of what the human harms in the past were, is thinking about the way the German government liquidated its annexed territories and made the people being liquidated pay for their own fare to be put on cattle trains to be moved into concentration camps.
Right.
I think the testimony is offered by Rudolf Verba, accented English, but very charming guy. He describes the way that there were problems in making manifest the steps of the final solution, which were entirely bureaucratic and entirely administrative, irrespective of the hundreds, dozens, thousands of people being trapped in these cattle cars. It was things like the drachma of Greece can't be exchanged for a Slovenian whatever, for a Monrovian whatever, for a Romanian whatever, and that's a long ways away from the Deutsche Mark.
Right, and the railways were basically independent contractors.
Who were there just to take freight pay, and they were willing to offer discounts for group rates. Travel.
Yeah.
That detail it both sent me with the silly quality of how capitalism works to encourage certain kinds of behaviors, but a reality of it all. If you can fill out a train, and then there's damage fees, because if it's overpacked, people are going to hurt windows, break things, they're going to damage the upholstery. These details were just stunning.
The Nazis were concentrating upon one thing. It should go in an orderly fashion so that it goes unimpeded. One doesn't lose time.
The other detail that sticks with me now that we're coming to surface from our 9-hour excursion is the quality of being packed into a rail car. I've stood in them just to, have a little goof with buddies or pretend you're pushing a rail to make a funny little photograph.
Right.
But the idea that I could start my journey across the equivalent of the Western United States in terms of space, which is where we live, and be moved to, let's just say, Washington, also the Western United States. And while that would be a car's drive distance of one extremely solid day, that could be a train's distance because of the times that these people were living in. That could be 2 weeks. 2 weeks of having no more food or water than what you brought with you if you even thought to.
Right.
You're not replenished. You're not being given a chance to evacuate, to urinate, to bathe.
Right.
So you are smelling yourself
right.
across those days.
And the train is getting more and more packed with
and
every stop.
And there was a woman speaker, mostly it's men in this piece, and she described how it wasn't so bad in the winter because at least we were warm together. Oh, that's a haunting detail.
Yeah.
But then you would be not able to sit, not able to stretch out and sleep as I do for hours each day. You are packed like the proverbial sardine against your fellow person from whatever village you come from or city or what have you. And you're that way for days until somebody starts to have heat stroke and they start to die. And you're all crapping yourself. You're all wetting yourself. So at some point you're in a puddle of your own excrement. And at some point people are dropping off to death. Or they're trying to be shielded by... I'm imagining how I would behave towards my kids. I'd want to help them, but then I'd be resentful of their needing my help because I'm feeling it. I'm not sleeping. I'm a mess. I'm feeling woozy from blood sugar problems.
Yeah.
How many days of that can I last before I become somebody who loses consciousness, before I become the latest object that everybody's now using as a bench?
Europe isn't exactly small, but it isn't big either. That train that, whose journey concludes at Treblinka, if you're on the train at that first stop, then you're waiting for an hour before you go, and just having to just spend all of this time thinking about what's going on, realizing how horrible it is, like existing in that way, when at the same time to the rail company, it's like, look, we got to keep these trains on schedule.
Right. We're thinking as well-fed Americans in a totally different society where we presume to have some insulation from this kind of bad action on scale. Individually, I think this stuff probably happens all the time behind closed doors.
Oh, yeah.
Which we're not privileged or forced to see. But this is kind of out in the open. And again, that's what's spooky about all of this. The various German leaders were thinking, okay, we've been given a task. We need to move 20 million people from one place to another, but they're spread out across 3,000 square miles. So how do we do it?
Yeah.
I'm imagining that from those sequences, and you've alluded to this, the sort of capture surveillance, where the German perpetrators aren't aware they're being observed, and we see them through the van. I'm imagining that they were young men with exactly that problem. We are contracted state workers in the military, and we've been told we've got a problem to solve. What is the problem? Well, the problem is organizing a group of people we've been told are going to be brought to us because they're criminal. Okay, so how do we build a better prison? Well, one, you don't want to pay top dollar. So you find the lowest cost system.
Right.
What's the easiest stuff? We put it in a forest. We can cut down the forest and build a fort out of the wood. You can think like that would be the way to solve all this. We have just we've taken over the historic homeland, which always was ours anyway. They call it Poland. We just call it Greater Germany. So let's move all of our operations there. It's cheaper. Labor is easier. And at some point, when you've taken so many steps that direction, you're not capable of reversing anymore, and you've enabled genocide.
Sorry, I guess I wouldn't have done that if I had known. It's weird because, for all of the things that keep me awake at night and that give me the constant existential dread that I always am feeling, dude, we have it so good,
right,
compared to this.
Yeah,
and whatever problem I see today, whatever's irking me today, or whatever's making me mad about some decision people are making, or something in the news or whatever, like, it ain't the Holocaust.
Ascho die Tränen deine, die Schuld ist nicht meine, weil so muss sein, so muss sein, so muss sein.
I felt like we were introduced to a lot more people in the first part. And I felt like in the second part, which is the longer part, we spent way more time with way fewer people. And I don't know at what stage, Lanzmann conceived of that. It's kind of crazy to me that he could have gone through all the footage he took and then, sort of come to this where he's able to really like make like two different feeling kind of halves to like the same film.
I mean, I know the joke is easy, but it's a little bit like Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Right.
Each of those movies, while conceived as a whole, were divided in a peculiar way for commercial purposes.
Right.
This wasn't divided for commercial purposes. It was divided for some other thematic purpose.
Yeah.
The detail that you're pointing out, something that caught my eye, is because we are meeting all of the people we saw in Part 1 again in Part 2. Mm-hmm. It's like they have costume changes because they were interviewed on multiple days.
Right.
So some of them are in different locations with different clothes on. But that change in, as you say, in focus and intensity is notable.
Yeah.
The gimmick of listening to somebody describe something, and then we watch a forest, and somebody walks through a forest with a long, shaky, handy cam as they go approach things that are being described, but now it just looks lush. And we've talked about this in Part 1.
Yeah.
That gimmick persists. But here, he doubles down on proximity to these people because the camera is no farther than conversational distance. Sometimes that can be just a few feet, sometimes across the room, but it's never far.
One question I had too was because we spend a lot of time, a lot of the B-roll, I suppose, is sort of the ruins of the various camps. Like I think we spend a lot of time at Treblinka, the ruins of it. Now, I haven't actually ever visited Germany or Poland, but are these not, for lack of a better term, like tourist attractions now?
I think that they're treated that way and how they herd people in and out. I'm not sure if they're like on World Heritage site lists. I haven't looked it up. It's possible that they're being conserved just like the pyramids are, as a lasting relic of human accomplishment, although in the negative.
Right.
But they are places where you I think you pay an admission.
Yeah, you go visit Dachau or something.
Right.
Well, and so...
Would you like to go inside of a gas chamber? You can see claw marks on the concrete.
Yeah,
I've read reports and listened to people describe doing such a thing, and I sort of want to do that, to be a disaster porn tourist. But on the other hand, I sort of don't want to.
Well,
because
it's so historically significant. Like, if you were there, you would almost kind of... You'd be like, well, I kind of have to go see this. But it's not like coming to California and being like, well, I got to go to Disneyland.
Right.
While I have not ever visited any of the concentration camps, the one place I have been is to Anne Frank's house.
Oh, okay.
In Amsterdam. And I got to say, that really was the most, I guess, unique experience I've ever had at what is ostensibly a tourist attraction. I've never been in a place where the atmosphere was so heavy.
That very phrase, or those ideas that you're suggesting about the Anne Frank house, I've heard people describe these Holocaust sites, their ruins, and in some cases the preserved facilities, so people can get a real impression of what the barracks look like, what the gas chambers look like, and see it. And then there are the naysayers who say it was all a hoax, who want to go and prove that this was an illusion for Western elites, probably Jewish media elites and pinko progressives. I mean, you're familiar with all of this. But that idea of it being a heavy place where there's a dislocation of the human spirit that weighs on people in the present who may not even really know what's happened here or appreciate it fully, come away sobered just a little bit.
Yeah. Errol Morris made this documentary that I thought was pretty fascinating. It's called, like, Mr. Death. Like the rise and fall of like Fred Leuchter. I don't remember what his name is.
I remember it.
But it was really fascinating because he got hired by some revisionist who wanted him to prove, because it came up in court or something. There was some kind of trial going on. It came up in court, and he wanted to prove that the Holocaust didn't happen. So he sent this guy who was some kind of chemical analyst. So it's been a while since I saw it. Who he sends him to the concentration camps to take like samples from the walls of the gas chambers to see if there was ever gas in there. And the guy can't find any physical remnants of any of the Zyklon or whatever like in the walls.
Right.
Which makes him a hugely controversial figure, and he's like derided as like an anti-Semite and stuff like that. When it's like, hey, I was just paid to do a scientific analysis here. It's just like flat Earth. Every time I listen to a flat earther, which I should never do,
but you do,
but I do, and every time it happens, all of what they consider to be their evidence to suggest that they're right is preposterous. And it crumbles under a modicum of scrutiny. So I don't even understand how you have people like, oh, the Holocaust didn't happen. Like, are you kidding? You think Bomba's being paid to, like, make this up?
Right. And then the alternative, and I'm given to thinking that the simplest solutions to a great many of the world's seemingly complicated problems are, in fact, the truth. The simple solution is there was a political entity that wanted to execute people it considered a national enemy, and it did.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while to work that out, but it required the buy-in of tens of thousands of participants as the prosecutors of that energy, but it worked.
Mm-hmm.
That makes some sense. Why? Well, our country's heritage is built on doing that to native people.
Right.
Built on doing that to African slaves. It's been built on that. I don't find that a leap.
Right.
It seems, and it is true.
But I don't want to put into Google proof that the Holocaust didn't happen.
Because this will only increase the panic.
This is Blockbusters and Birdwalks, a conversation between Garrett Chaffin-Quiray and
Ed Rosa.
Boop boobity doo.